Hey, this is C&D channel. I'm Chris. This is MMA for you. I'm gonna be just pretty much giving out my thoughts on Strikeforce closing down and some overall thoughts and some of the ramifications that come with it. Strikeforce will be having their final show on January 12th, 2013. The fight card consists so far triple title fight, even though I guess they won't matter. You got Gilbert Melendez versus Pat Healy, Luke Rockhold versus Lorenz Larkin, Nate Marquardt versus Tarek Saffiedine, and Daniel Cormier versus Dion Stamen. It's going to be nice to see the Strikeforce guys go into the UFC. I think a good amount of them can do very well. Even a guy like an Isaac Valley Flag, for example. Who else can I say? Carlos Fedor, Pat Healy. I think a lot of these guys can do very well. Not very well in the UFC, but have staying power in the UFC. There's a lot of guys that I can see be solid mid-tiers, along with a lot of like top 10 guys, and some guys are like legit prospects. It's kind of bittersweet for me though with Strikeforce. I've always liked Strikeforce. I always felt it's like the promotion, especially during its later days, that they definitely did the best that they could with what they had, and they didn't have much. So they resigned themselves to having like fun fights, also give guys like title shots after one fight win streak. But like, the fact of the matter is they just don't have a roster to really do much else, So yeah, kind of bittersweet, but yeah, seeing some of these guys, Marquardt, Rockhold, Melendez, Jacare, Fejao, Musasi, hopefully. We got like an OSP prospect right there. Saffiedine would be cool. Jordan Meehan. Tyron Woodley even, good, not the most aesthetically pleasing fighter. Of course, his fight against Nate Marquardt was fun. But he's a good fighter. I would like to see him in the UFC, and in the sense that you are finally getting closer to having like the best guys fighting in the UFC. Of course, now it's mainly like Bellator. It's gonna have like the next best guys. But even then, you see like Hector Lombard and it looks like Eddie Alvarez eventually going to the UFC anyways. So seeing those guys to the UFC is going to be great. Wouldn't surprise me to see a guy like Gilbert Melendez fight for the title. I think he's that good. Maybe in Luke Rockhold. Daniel Cormier is a guy I've wanted to see in the UFC for a long time, either at 205 or at heavyweight. Happy to see him. Very curious to see if they'll have Josh Barnett in the UFC. I think he should be there, to be honest with you. Even I know he has those. I know he's failed 3 separate drug tests, but he is a solid fighter, great personality. He could be an asset to the UFC, and I'd love to see him fight Frank Mir. I've always wanted to see Josh Barnett versus Frank Mir. I think that'd be really cool. This final show, pretty packed. I always check out the Strikeforce cards. Looks good so far. I like what I see. So on that front, you got these fighters. They're going to get more fights now. That's going to be really nice. And just a lot of guys really just prove themselves. Like I said, I think Strikeforce actually has, I think a majority of the roster can survive in the UFC, either as mid-tiers, one or a couple top 10s here and there, and a couple prospects. Some guys will fizzle out, of course, but others I think will have some staying power. Again, the next subject about the Strikeforce final show, and it's probably going to be the majority of what I'm going to be talking about, is that women's MMA will now be in the UFC. From what I can tell, it's going to be the 135-pound division. Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate are already signed to the UFC. There's a lot of doubters. It's just one of those things where one thing I always notice with when talking about women's MMA is that it really seems to like begin and end with Ronda Rousey, as if like women's MMA is just in the vacuum of like now, and it's like, here's the thing, by having women's MMA in the UFC, in my opinion, you're more likely to get higher level female athletes getting into MMA, because now you have the incentive of money, fame, and exposure by having women's MMA in the UFC. There's like 3 Olympians I know of that do MMA right now: Sarah McMahon, Randy Miller, and Ronda Rousey. Now that you have money, fame, and exposure, it wouldn't surprise me to see more like Olympians female Olympians go to the UFC. And just female athletes in general. For all I know, some bench warmer, soccer player, volleyball player, basketball player is going to be like, you know what? This fighting thing looks pretty cool. Maybe I'll give it a try. And in that sense, that's why I don't think it ends with Ronda Rousey, because like it's like, oh, once Ronda Rousey loses, it's over. It's like, no, I don't think it ends. I don't think it ends because she loses. If you're assuming that you get more higher level females into the UFC, I think in a sense it kind of just begins with her, to get more higher level females there. The other thing that's surprising that I always see is like, a lot of people say is like, I don't think it's a good time right now for it. It's like, well, when is a good time to have it? When are we going to have another Ronda Rousey? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if we'll ever have a Olympian who's very attractive and very outspoken outside of the cage, who's female. I don't know if we'll have someone like that anytime soon. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we're not going to have her. Who knows if we're going to have her in the future? And the division right now is pretty good. I mean, you have Miesha Tate, Sarah Kaufman, Alexis Davis, Kat Zingano, Amanda Nunes, Leslie Smith, Caitlin Young, Marlos Kunin, Liz Carmouche, Julie Kedzie, Jessamine Duke, Sarah D'Alelio, Shayna Baszler, Milana Dudova, Jermaine Durandamy is going down, Hiroko Yamanaka is going down to 135, Eddie and Gomez. You actually have a pretty decent roster to start up with. Some of those people I named aren't that great. Some of them are actually pretty good, and can have Sarah McMahon. How did I miss Sarah McMahon? Jeez. Yeah, so, and that also shows me, I think Alexis Davis will eventually fight Ronda Rousey. Sarah McMahon will probably fight her. Kat Zingano could fight her. Amanda Nunes. You have challengers for Rousey. They're not like big name challengers. And speaking of big name challengers, Cyborg versus Rousey. I don't know what's going on with Cyborg. Maybe we'll see Cyborg versus Rousey in the UFC. The other thing that a lot of people like to talk about is the skill level of female fighters. In general, women are inferior in sports in comparison with their male counterparts. It's more or less fact. Um, Here's the problem though with this idea of like skill level. Skill level in MMA does not equate to entertainment. John Fitch, Jake Shields, skilled guys. They are known as boring fighters, except for Fitch's last fight against Eric Silva. GSP is getting the boring moniker now. Fight of the night goes to stand and bang fighters, brawlers that don't show a lot of skills. How many like fight of the nights did like Leonard Garcia get? Guy's not highly skilled. I love the guy. He's not highly skilled. You know, he's getting fight of the night. Donson versus Formiga was booed. Highly skilled guys there. Benavidez versus Johnson, flyweight title fight. Booed. Two highly skilled fighters. Skill level does not equate to entertainment in MMA. That's just that's the way it is. Lay and pray can happen at the highest level and the lowest level of MMA. For example, so yeah, it's just one of those things with skill level. And I've seen like female fights and like Invicta. These girls always have like this chip on their shoulder, and actually by having like lower level skill, it actually opens up opportunities for more excitement in the sense that you're able to get more finishes. You can hit a girl more clean if she's not as skilled. You can pass her guard more if she's not as skilled. You can get a finish on her if she's not as skilled. It sounds bad, but the fact of the matter is if we're just going with this idea of like excitement and entertainment, skill level doesn't necessarily equate to entertainment and excitement in that sense. And also, if you look at like a casual fan, they watch MMA for like a night of fights, from what I read from like Meltzer, I think. Some of them boo when the fight hits ground. So you're not talking about people that are educated about MMA very well. A person that probably doesn't know the difference between an Americana and a Chimera. The skill level argument only applies to those people who are watching MMA for the skill aspect of it. They're more of the sporting aspect of it, of MMA. And I mean that's fine, but once again, I'm just relating skill level to entertainment. It doesn't apply across the board, and skill level doesn't equal entertainment across the board either. People compare women's MMA to other sports. Oh, how come women's basketball isn't very successful? How come women's boxing is not very successful? When you talk about that, MMA is a very unique creature upon itself. One, we've seen Strikeforce. Women's fights are integrated alongside men's fights. So, it's not like you're watching all females. Like people will say like, oh, I won't pay to see women fight in the UFC. Well, you're not doing that. You're seeing one or two women along with 10 other fights. So I think people get this wrong idea, like MMA, women's MMA is in some sort of vacuum or something. They're alongside the other fights. Women's basketball is not alongside men's basketball in a sense. You're not watching like the men's basketball playing and then right after you're watching like female basketball. No, you're watching a 15 minutes one men's fight, maybe another one, then a 15-minute women's fight, and then go back to the men's fight. You see how that works? It's not the same. It doesn't work like other sports. And also, women's MMA managed to piggyback onto the sport while MMA is still really young. So MMA is not really established yet. You know, people aren't so resistant to change in the UFC or MMA yet because it's still an ever-evolving and changing sport being so young. And so it really helps women's MMA that they're a part of that youth. And speaking of youth, you know, people say, oh, you know, people don't want to see other women hitting each other in the face, and that's kind of true. But in the same token, you know, this is kind of assumption here, but when I see like the younger generation of people in general, they see girls doing what guys do. When I went to my MMA gym, my trainers, some of them were female. I would spar with females. I rolled with females. You know, it's not uncommon now to see females doing what men do. And I think MMA being a young sport, you also have a very young audience that only could be more receptive to seeing females fighting each other. I'm not saying all guys will be cool with it. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. You know, some guys just won't be cool with it, and that's fine. That's going to happen. People still are uncomfortable seeing two guys fighting in a cage. You know. So that's the thing with women's MMA. I think there's big benefits. Ronda Rousey alone is on Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone. I think you'll probably get a larger female audience. I think you get more higher female level fighters. You can get into other female media. And I think it's kind of a good risk, you know, for the UFC. You know, do it now or else when? When Ronda Rousey's gone? You know, that's dumb. Use her. She's a star. Use her. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my thoughts on Strikeforce closing down. If you have any comments, just leave them below. That's it for MMA for you. Thank you guys very much.